All right, so excited to have Jason Harris here, founder of Mekanism. I pronounced that right? That's Mekanism, right?
Yeah, co-founder.
Co-founder of Mekanism.
I'll take it.
And you just came out with a book here. I've never been able to hold up a book on one of these episodes, but I get to now. So the Soulful Art of Persuasion. I read it. It's great. I thought that there are so many things that influencers could learn from advertising. And why not bring in someone who's built a successful agency and now written a book about persuading people? So thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
I think for a little context, just, a primer on your backstory.
Sure. So my backstory is at a young age, I run an advertising agency, like you said. At a young age, I knew I wanted to get into advertising, which is a little unusual. So when I was about 12 or 13, I was like a TV addict. My parents were teachers and they were at home reading all the time. I wasn't such an avid reader when I was younger, which I am now. So they were right. That's the thing that sucks about parents is a lot of times they're right.
Yeah.
A lot of times they're wrong. And I would sit and watch a lot of TV, and I was always interested in those commercials that came on in between the programming. And specifically, do you remember Lego My Ego? Mm-hmm. And the Kool-Aid Man?
Yep.
He would, bust through whatever scene. Yeah, oh yeah. Hey, Kool-Aid. And he'd bust through, and there'd be, sugar water spilling out of the top of his head.
Yeah, your mouth starts watering.
Yeah, you're like, I want Kool-Aid right now. And so as a kid, I would watch those, and I was like, oh, that's like actually someone's job is to work on those things that go in between the TV shows. And so as a kid, I just was sort of always thinking, I want to get into that field and into advertising. Didn't really know much about it. And so I kind of always knew that was my path. And when I got out of college, I majored in economics because my parents thought I should be a businessman. And I really loved art history instead. But when I did what they wanted because they paid for it. Yeah. And then when I got out of college, I went from like a promotion. I promoted Miller beer. You know those like Budweiser girls. You were a Budweiser girl. I was a Budweiser girl. I helped organize where the Miller girls went to the on and off premise locations, which is like a great job as a young guy out of college. So I was in promotions, and I got a job at a design firm, and then I kept going and worked at a bunch of advertising agencies. And I sort of always knew I was going to pick what I liked and didn't like about how they were creating their firms and the culture. And I was going to take that and then one day, hopefully, start my own thing. And so that's sort of what I did. So I have a really weird path where I sort of knew early on what I wanted to do and just sort of stayed on that path and went and did it. My commercial that made me want to get into advertising, although unlike you, I could never get an ad agency to give me a job, was the Volkswagen one with the Nick Drake Pink Moon song. Oh yeah, so where they're driving and they pull up to the loud bar and they look at each other and then they just put it in reverse and keep driving. Yeah. I was like, I want to do that. Yeah. That's fucking cool. Yeah. But you don't meet many people that, as 12 or 13-year-olds are like, that want to do that. I want to make commercials. I want to manipulate the population into buying shit. Yeah, that's pretty much what we do for a living. So then, why write a book? You've got a successful agency. Yeah. Why write a book? Well, the idea behind the book was, I always read. I read a lot, so I read a lot of business books, and a lot of the books I was reading seemed to go against the way I was building my company and the way I felt about approaching business and clients and relationships. And so I was like, I think there's like something missing in that sector. And then I also thought, I've been in advertising for 20 years. I've had an agency for 13 years. If I could take what I learned about building a business and advertising, where you say you're sort of, I hate the word manipulation, but you're persuading at the highest level, because you have to persuade. I mean, this is what you do. You have to persuade clients to sign up for your idea. You have to convince them it's a good idea, convince them to work with certain influencers on a project. and why. And then you have to put that content out there and convince the audience to go buy those goods and services that you're selling.
Yeah.
And so if I could take those lessons on building a business and selling it that sort of under the microscope level and make it broad so anyone could apply those, that was sort of the concept behind the book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love it because it puts a different, I think, spin on sales.
Yeah.
And I love sales.
Yeah.
My first job, I was on Wall Street. I hated it. I was making 220 phone calls a day trying
What
to
were
sell.
you doing?
I was trying to, I was doing Forex. I was a futures and commodities broker trying to get money out of people to invest in foreign exchange.
And that's like cold calling?
Cold calling,
like people,
220 phone calls a day.
It's like,
you couldn't leave the
office. We got the list, call the list.
It was
like that? Wow.
It was
Glenn
terrible.
Gary, Glenn Ross.
I was so bad at it.
Uh-huh.
Just truly terrible because I didn't believe in it. And then as you know, building this business and getting quite good at sales.
Yeah.
I'm now just like banging the drum. It's just like, it is the life skill.
Yeah.
Every single thing in your life is persuasion, right?
Yeah.
If you want anything, if it's your idea, if it's a promotion, whatever, you have to know how to sell it in. You have to know how to persuade people and get them on your side.
Yeah.
And I think you break it down in a way that doesn't feel Glengarry Glen Ross. It doesn't feel like, you know, guys in greasy suits in some dungeon, you know, pitching.
Yeah.
It feels a lot like just being a human and having some passion. And I think that you organize it in a way that is really digestible. So maybe just talk about broadly what those kind of 4 principles are.
Yeah, sure. So I also, you know, think we live in an age of distrust right now. And so it's building trust is really critical to persuasion and selling and getting your point across because our bullshit detectors are so high.
Yeah.
You know, we hear about fake news. We don't know when we hear information what sources are credible. All the news are biased. You know, they're supposed to be unbiased, but they're always either liberal or conservative, and that's what they serve up. You don't know, you know, the president's talking about that never happened, this never happened, they're trying to get me. So you're not sure what's real or not. There's government officials that get subpoenaed that don't show up. So like there's no rules anymore. Yeah. So we live in this age of distrust. You don't know what Facebook's doing with your data. You know, there's phishing scams. We're just sort of in this world where people are not trusting. And so if you can build relationships based on trust, you're going to be much farther along than other people because people are just on guard today. Yeah. And so the principles are really about building that trust and that character and those relationships that get people on your side. And so those 4 principles are, the first one's original. And so that's all about being yourself. You know, that Oscar Wilde quote, "Be yourself, everyone else is taken," has to hold true. So you have to lean into your quirks. You know, you have to lean into your weird paintings and that you always wear a suit and that you love Art Deco stuff and whatever those things that you're into, you really push hard against those. And so a lot of the books and a lot of the old school sales materials about mirror and matching, and it's about playing to your audience. It's about...
And for those who haven't, you know, aren't deep into sales philosophy, mirroring is, you know, maybe explain it, right? It's generally the idea that whatever
it's just like what it
pace
sounds.
the person's talking at, you talk. Whatever their mood is, you copy it, right?
You copy their mood, you copy their body language, whatever their interests are, you try to find a similar spin on your interests. You like golf, I love golf, you know, blah, blah, blah.
I had a friend who was like, he went to an interview at the NHL and they were like, "You a hockey fan?" And he was like, "As of 5 minutes ago, I'm the biggest hockey fan you ever met." You know, he's like, he didn't give a shit about hockey.
Right, he doesn't
That's a
care
clever
about
line,
but of course. And there's one thing about like researching your material, and there's another about like lying about your personality. So you know that idea of knowing what you believe in, knowing what your quirks are, what your interests are, and leaning into those and creating stories around those that can transport the audience based on what your interests are. A book, a movie that spoke to you, a personal story and what you learned from it. Having those stories at the ready, bring yourself, it sort of opens the kimono and says, hey, I'm vulnerable and this is who I am. And that builds trust with the other person. And it's just smart to always be yourself anyway.
Yeah.
But you really have to know yourself to be yourself, which is a lot of what you guys talk about before you go as an influencer, before you can talk to others, know what you're really trying to do and what you're trying to sell and who you are.
And it's so important for brands. I mean, we say at the beginning of every meeting that like you have to know yourself. You know thyself, right? Like
know thyself. Yeah.
Olay is a great product.
Yeah.
But if it tries to market like Glossier, it's going to fail miserably because it can't be. Everyone wants to be Glossier right now, but like you can't.
Yeah.
You can be Olay.
Yeah.
And that's got its own benefits.
Yeah.
But
Oil
you
of
try and
Olay,
market like Glossier, you're going to get killed.
Of course. So push into what you are from a brand and a human standpoint. So that's about original. The second one is about being a generous person. And this is something that I had to learn over time. So a lot of these principles you're going to be natural at, you're going to be gifted at, and a lot of these you have to sort of learn. And why I call them habits is because you do them enough over time, they become a habit, and you don't have to think about it. But being a generous person, something, for example, I had to learn. And generosity is about giving time, advice, connections. Sometimes it can be gifts, but it's really about that idea of being generous and giving of yourself. Like give things away without expecting anything in return, and they magically come back to you with compound interest because that's your approach on life, that's your approach on business, is to give things away. It's not to run your business into the ground. It's not giving away your services for free, but it's thinking about other people. Buying a book, you buy 2 books and you hold on to it until you find someone that you think this would speak to. Right. You see an article, if you have a retail client and you see an article on the explosion of the new style of retail, you send that article to them versus posting it on social for everyone to read. You do one-on-one connections. You send text messages to let people know you're thinking about them. Those types of sort of ideas of generosity, that's just a good way to be. And I had to really think about it. I have a belief that you should never let relationships drop to zero. So a client that you pitched, you didn't win, instead of scratching them off in the Glenn Gary, Glenn Ross style and calling the next person down the list, you built a relationship with that person. You pitched them an idea. You made a connection. Think about, I didn't win it. Think about it as a no for right now versus a no forever. And
it's a soft yes.
It's a soft yes. That's how I look at it. And I to not let relationship drop to zero, I try to get in touch in some way. I sort of at the beginning of the week on Monday, I'll write down 5 either friends or clients that I haven't spoken to in a while, and I'll do one sort of act a day, reaching out to each of those, and then I just kind of compile a list. I mean, it's work. I have to work at it, but it's very effective in making sure your relationships don't drop to zero. Because when that client moves and then you reach out to them to try to get something from them, it's so obvious that you're trying to, you're not being a generous person. You're just trying to get them.
I get this with influencers all the time. It's like the only time they reach out to me is when they want something, which is fine. Yeah. Like, I'm happy to do the favor. I'm happy to connect you to the 4 Seasons or whatever the hell you want from me. Right. But it's also so transparent, and you realize like how much a random email that doesn't have an ask in it, how valuable that can be in maintaining a relationship, because you don't want to feel like just someone you just want something from.
That's just and you can see right through it.
Yeah.
So I have a story in the book that's called The $1 Million Hoodie, and this is sort of when I kind of thought of it more as a habit and a practice, is I met this guy from Ben & Jerry's at a conference, and I thought he was a cool guy. I got his information, and I sent him a hoodie from Mekanism. It has our logo on it, and he works in Burlington, Vermont, where they make the ice cream. It's cold. Yeah. Wore that hoodie every freaking day. Love that hoodie. And then 10 months later, they fired their agency for some reason, and they were doing an agency pitch to hire a new agency. And he's like, we should throw these guys in the mix as like a dark horse. Yeah. And now we've been their agency for 6 years.
Amazing.
And so just by thinking of sending him a hoodie, because I met a cool guy I thought I liked, I wasn't thinking like I'm going to win the account. that's just an example of how those things come back to
Probably
you.
more than $1 million hoodie.
It's probably a $7 million hoodie. Yeah. That hoodie's lined with gold. Yeah.
Obviously, in the influencer space, originality is I think, funny enough, is overlooked because I think a lot of people look at what's worked. They get frustrated they're not growing.
Yeah.
And then they say, what's working? Well, this influencer is growing really quickly doing this, so I'll just do that. And then right now we see it with like, I don't know if you've heard of this woman, Teza. She's an influencer, great photographer. She's got an app. She's got her own filters. And all of Instagram subtly now looks like her.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because she grew like 400,000 or 500,000 followers in a couple of years. It worked really well. So like,
she had like her own filter.
She had her own thing. She's got her own app with her filters that she's created.
That's sick.
But now everything looks like her. And everyone's trying to do her, but they can't do it as well as she does. So it's just this like weird knockoff, like, it's like Zara's version of a Balenciaga, shoe or something.
Right.
I'm always like, I don't get it. Like, why?
Yes, I know that's true. Yes, correct. Yeah.
Like, why aren't people more, like, why are they not diving more into their personalities? Why are they trying to copy what they see is working?
Well, I think everyone wants like the quick path to success, and they don't look at business as a marathon. They look at it as this person skyrocketed. If I do that, I can skyrocket. But they lose. And influencers started, YouTube influencers started because they were vulnerable and they were open and they collected an audience because they turned on the camera and gave them a peek inside their lives and their real lives. They weren't trying to be a character. They were being themselves. And those are sort of the best foundational influencers that, grew the whole online space because they let people into their world and they were vulnerable and leaned into their quirks. And, a big idol of mine's always been David Bowie. I love David Bowie, not just his music, but he, to me, typifies that idea of what you're talking about, which is originality. So when he first started at the record label, when he got his first deal, he was David Robert Jones, and they wanted him to play folk songs like Bob Dylan, because that was what was popular.
Right.
So they're like, just write your own songs and play like this. And he came out with 2 albums that bombed, and no one knew who he was. And he left and went to a Buddhist monastery. He started like a media arts lab. He studied mime. I don't know why. But he leaned into like all this weird shit. Yeah, he leaned into all this weird shit and cut his record deal.
Yeah.
And was broke and went and like explored himself and then came back and, came back did Space Oddity, came back with all these characters, Ziggy Stardust. But he leaned into he like waved his freak flag. You weren't sure if he was male or female, if he was bi or straight, and he just leaned into this sort of, I'm gonna be who I am, and I'm gonna morph and be this sort of creative creature that is expressing myself, my truest self. And that's when he like became one of the best-selling artists of all time, because he wasn't trying to be someone else. He wasn't copying. If Bob Dylan's skyrocketing up the charts, that he can't copy that and do the same thing, because that's not him.
Yeah.
And so I always use that example as, be more like David Bowie, like lean into your weirdness, find out those things that you're interested in, and that's what's going to set you apart. You have to set yourself apart.
Right. And what if
for influencers, they can't be the same as everyone else.
Yeah. And what if you don't feel like you're that different or weird? I think that there's this, some people might be like, right, but like obviously David Bowie's a creative genius and a total freak show, and we love him for that.
Yeah. What if someone's not?
Yeah, what if you're just like, you feel kind of like, well, I don't know if I feel that original in general.
Yeah.
I just feel like I'm kind of a normal, person trying to like have this normal life. And maybe I'm trying to document it online.
Yeah.
A lot of the influencer space is about relatability. It's and it's about creating a connection with an audience. Yeah. But I think there's this desire to seem really interesting, and some people don't feel that interesting.
Well, I guess I would say, why do they want to be an influencer? If they don't have a point of view or something to say, what is what is their reason for being an influencer? And it could just be what you're saying, where I'm going to just bare my soul and relate to the everyday person out there because I'm going to be more open than the next person. Or maybe they learn to be like a really good storyteller at the things that they care about, but they might not be super freaky or out there or weird or overly creative. But somehow they need to come up with a way to tell a story, or a new way that their videos are always shot, or a new way that they tell their story about their lives. But somehow it has to be something different. It doesn't have to be that they're so unique, but it has to be that the way they tell their story or the way they let people into their lives has to be different, I would say.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that not everyone is owed success in the place that they want it.
Yeah.
You know, I think that some people will never get a following.
Right.
I don't think that you can just fucking hustle and
Right.
do this
Yeah.
and listen to these videos and read the books and be successful.
Yeah.
You know, I think that sometimes like it's not for you.
Right.
I
feel that a lot.
Yeah, like
Right.
I'm not, you know, there's a lot of things that I'm just never going to be good at. And like I could try really hard and it wouldn't happen. And I think that some people feel like with social media that they can just do the right things and they're almost owed a following. Like why isn't it happening for me? And sometimes it's just like it's just not for you.
I think that goes back to if people see someone meteorically skyrocket, they're like, I'll do those 5 things. And if people selling you like some online webinar about how to do that, there might be tips in there, but it has to come from you. It has to come from yourself. And like, you know, I think it's dangerous. A lot of I love Gary Vee. You know, he's awesome.
Yeah.
But a lot of the things he says, if they're construed in the wrong way, I think are dangerous, because just working harder does not mean you have a good idea.
Right.
It does not mean you're going to be successful. Like you need a good idea and a good work ethic and something original.
And a lot of luck.
And not all those things always line up, and that's okay. But you just keep grinding does not mean you're going to change the outcome.
Right.
You know
and
what I mean?
I think it goes back to your first point here was knowing yourself, right? Like I picked up the guitar in college and learned it well enough to, you know, write some bullshit songs, and friends would be like, oh my gosh, you should like do this. And I was like, there is just no way I have the talent for this.
I wish we had a guitar right here.
Yeah.
I would love to hear a bullshit song.
Yeah, well, maybe on like
Another
episode 200.
Okay, great.
But
what episode are you on?
What are we on? 173.
Oh, you better start practicing.
But I was like, I know that's not my path. Like I know that like I'm not an artist.
Yeah.
And like I am yes, better than most people that pick up a guitar.
Yeah.
But like I'm never gonna be the best in the world.
Yeah.
So for me, it was like very easy to be like, no, I'm not doing that.
So I also played guitar, and I was very mediocre.
Jam sessions gonna happen.
I was so mediocre that I picked up the bass.
Yeah.
As a good example for like what we're talking about, because everyone needs a fucking bass player.
Everyone needs a bass player.
Because no one wants to play the bass because it's fucking boring.
Yeah.
But there's a gazillion mediocre guitar players, so I learned the bass. I added some effects pedals to get like a unique noise from the bass, so I could play the bass like a guitar and sound different. And you know, I was in a lot of bands. I've never made a career of it, but because I was a bass player with a unique sound, I was in demand.
This is such
versus being
great example.
Yeah, it's a good
so
versus being like another of 100,000 mediocre guitarists in the area.
Right.
So I always had gigs, and I always could play with people because no one wants to play the bass.
Right.
It's boring.
I had a friend who's always like, oh, the bass player is always like...
Everyone wants to sing and play guitar.
Yeah,
because
like
that's
the bass player
line.
is usually the hottest person in the band because like it's easy and it's just like some...
Bass player never gets laid, man. No one's like, I want the bass player.
Probably not.
It's always like the guitarist and the singer, the drummer. Maybe the drummer if he's on a riser.
Yeah, you know.
And then the bass player's like in the back with no spotlight on him.
They get the bass player like back in the green room. Just like,
they're like, oh, this guy's still here. Yeah, that's how it works.
Did we plug him in?
Yeah, exactly.
Let's jump back to generosity.
All right.
I think for influencers, you talk about how every interaction you should give something away.
Yeah.
I thought that was like such an interesting little way to package it.
Yeah.
And something we've been beating the drum for influencers is that like before you hit publish, you got to ask yourself like, is this doing anything for your audience, or is it only doing something for you? Because if it's, hey guys, look how great I am.
Yeah.
That's not. What the fuck do I care about?
Right.
That? It's got to be something that is valuable.
It's a good way to turn people off. Yeah.
How, like, for creating content and telling stories, how do you kind of include generosity in that?
Well, I think for telling stories, I mean, I think it's whatever the particular influencer's story is, they might already have that. I think it's more of around the content, how you can be a generous person. I think it's about the talent that you use maybe, or a brand that hooks you up with something, or someone that gets you a gig. It's much more about, I mean, you've worked with these influencers who are like a pain in the ass. Mm-hmm. They won't change anything. Mm-hmm. They maybe barely get back to you.
No, never. That never happens.
And I think it's just such a frustrating process when it can be. It doesn't have to be that. It can be much smoother process. It doesn't mean they have to bend or create something they don't believe in. They should always do that. Mm-hmm. But it's the generous respect that comes around that job that I think makes all the difference. It's not just the end product. It's how they come across throughout the process. Yeah. And, if you're hooking someone up with a lot of work, you ask them for a small favor, it's not a big deal. Or if they know that you work on this brand and they want to do more work with that brand, instead of just saying, hire me again, maybe pitch an idea. Maybe generously pitch an idea for free and see what happens. Or send information about, I think this brand should be doing X, Y, and Z because I've been looking at it. Be proactive about it. Don't just sit back and wait for those opportunities to come to you and then be sort of snooty when you either do it or don't do it. Be respectful. There's this study that I talk about that Harvard interviewed 100,000 employees across every sector, and they found that more than money, more than a title, more than a promotion, the number one factor that made people enjoy what they do is respect of others. Mm-hmm. And so respect is also showing a form of generosity. It's treating others with kindness the way you want to be treated, and it's just respecting people that you work with and not treating them like you're lucky that I'm doing this project for you. Yeah. And it makes a big difference.
Yeah. I remember, I think I've brought it up before on the show, but hearing some high up at Nike saying that, like, when they do a collaboration, be it with Kanye West or LeBron, that like in that room, they see both parties as equal. There's no one that's bigger than Nike, and Nike isn't bigger than anyone. Right. And that you have to have those relationships be based on respect. But running a client services business, and that's, influencers are doing the same thing. They may not call it that, but they're running a client services business as well. You have disrespectful clients. Yeah. You have clients that don't respect your time, your employees' time. Yeah. They're life ruiners. I've had a lot of people sitting on this couch crying, being like, I can't do this anymore with this person. And sometimes we've made the decision to say, you know what, we have to walk away. It's not worth the money. Yeah. What do you do if you're an influencer and you feel like you aren't being respected in the relationship, but it's a valuable one?
I mean, that's a great question. I think there's always, a lot of times that disrespect comes, a lot of times it's in our head, but we don't communicate it, And
what do you mean?
I think a lot of times there's resentment that builds up in client services that goes unsaid. And I think we talk about it so much internally, and people crying on the couch and complaining to you, that you feel like you've talked to the client or the brand or the person that hired you more than you have. You know what I mean? I think a lot of times we just, and that happens with us too. Like, we have really difficult clients, and we'll spend a lot of energy talking about it internally. But really what it comes down to is you need to have one-on-one with that person and explain to them
So, hey, I'm feeling
and
a
say,
little-
hey, this is how you're making me feel. And you know, if we try to work a little more positively, you're going to get a lot more out of it. You try to make it beneficial
Yeah.
for the other side. If you know, treat me in a certain way, I'm going to be able to pull harder for you, you know, and you make it good for them, not
Yeah.
just like bitching and moaning that
Right.
like you need to be nicer to me.
Stomping your feet saying,
But
hey,
why?
this-
What's the outcome for them?
Yeah.
If they can, you know, act a little bit different. But I noticed that internally a lot at our company, that we'll do a lot of internal discussions and we'll assume that the client has caught up to us.
Right.
But we need to address it with the client. And
Yeah.
when you do, sometimes it works and it doesn't always. Sometimes they're good for a week and then they slip back into their bad
Right.
tendencies. And then you have to just make the decision.
Yeah.
I'll finish this project, but you know, we're not getting enough out of this relationship. And
Yeah.
you have to be able to say no.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And speaking of saying no,
How do you deal with it, by the way?
you know,
Do you fire clients?
we don't work on a retainer basis, so like we never have to be like firing a client. We just won't
Continue the project.
continue to pitch.
Or you'll say you're too busy for the
yeah,
next
hey,
one.
we can't
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah.
It's rare
Yeah.
that we've done that, but
Yeah.
like, you know, some people are just like miserable, unhappy,
Yeah.
you know, people, and it's just not worth continuing.
Yeah.
You know, it's just and you have to look at the team that is like, you know, their lives, their personal lives, their emotional well-being is starting to be impacted,
Yeah.
and saying, is this worth the money we're
Right.
making from this? And how much space will it open up if you're not complaining about it every day?
Right. That's true.
And you're focusing
That's
on
true.
more positive things.
And sometimes, and I don't know, you know, how big influencers have different team sizes that they work with, and sometimes they just work on their own based on their size. So a lot of times chemistry makes a difference. So it can just be two personalities just can't,
Just not
they
vibing.
they can't vibe.
Yeah.
And so sometimes switching up the talent makes a difference. And maybe for an influencer, if they have someone contacting the client or the brand and it's not them, it could be that they just switch up and get someone new
Yeah.
in. And sometimes just new blood creates new energy. And a lot of times we'll just have to switch people on different accounts, because most of our accounts are retainer, and it's hard to lose a retainer
Yeah.
because you have staff associated
Right.
with that client. Yeah.
So something else you said that I thought was different than most of the advice that gets kicked around.
Yeah.
It was in the generosity section, and you're saying that, like, you know, if someone wants you to sit in a meeting, if someone wants you to jump on a call,
Yeah.
you're going to say yes. And you know, so much in business books, it's about saying no.
Yeah.
You have to, you know, manage your calendar.
Yeah.
And don't say yes to these things. And for influencers, they're being asked constantly, go to this event, do this.
Yeah.
Can you, you know? And I think there is this feeling of like, you know, at some point you have to say no.
Yeah.
But I do think, you know, as an influencer grows, they can also start to feel really high and mighty and say, well, it's beneath me to go to a
Yeah.
store opening
Yeah.
for this brand. It's not worth my
Yeah.
time anymore because
Yeah.
my time is so valuable.
Yeah.
So your time is pretty valuable.
Yeah.
But it seems like you've made a decision to say yes to a lot of these things.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, I think it's not just say yes to everything. It's say yes, because I used to just say no. My philosophy was like, start with no, and I changed it to start with yes, which is if someone asks you, if someone has the balls or the willingness to ask you for advice or I don't know, a pitch or counsel or whatever it might be, for them to do that takes a lot of energy, and they're probably scared a lot of times to reach out. So I always try, one rule I have is like, I'll answer every single email I ever get. I'll never not respond to someone. Even if I'm responding and saying, I'm out of the country, I can't do that, I'm not going to that, whatever it might be. Just ignoring it is really disheartening to people, and I think it says a lot about your character.
Yeah.
So I just have that rule where I always respond to everything. And if someone has if someone DMs me and says, I'm starting an agency and I want advice, I'll always figure out a way to slide in a 15-minute conversation or whatever it might be. And the reason I have that philosophy isn't and it takes a lot less time than you think.
Yeah.
But the reason why I have that philosophy is if I ask someone for something, I would really like them to respond, even if they can't do it, or to give them part of their time. It's just having that idea of the generous philosophy and that generous approach with your time. And you just make sure it's not wasted time and that you don't overextend yourself, but you keep it really short. Or if you don't have time to return a call, say put your question in writing and I'll respond, which takes, a minute.
Right.
Or you send them to a piece of work you did or an article or, whatever it might be. So I just have kind of blankly have that philosophy of trying to always respond to people.
Do you think there's a world where, that gets to be overwhelming and too much? Because like for an influencer, you got hundreds of thousands of followers. You might be getting...
influencers might be a little bit different,
Would you, let's say, okay, this book does great, you have 5 of them, you've got the agency, and you've got this, career as an author, and speaker, and you're getting hundreds and hundreds of emails a day and hundreds of DMs. Would you then build would you build a process that allowed those things to at least be answered somehow? Would you have teams that kind of went through it for you? Do you think it's important to... would it continue to be important to try and respond to all those emails, even if you can't do it personally?
Yeah, it would be. And I think if you're that big of a influencer with a following, a footprint that big, or if I'm getting so inundated I just can't keep up, and investing in a team would be the answer. So still keeping that philosophy, but it wouldn't be personal. It'd be from their team or from my team, but have someone from your group responding, I think is really critical to build those relationships.
So let's go. Principle 3.
Principle 3, empathy.
Yeah.
And so empathy is really the idea. Well, you know what the word means, but the idea is creating.
My team might disagree with you.
What's
sometimes.
that?
My team might disagree that I know what the word means. Sometimes.
Oh, okay, all right. But the idea is it's all about having a us versus them mentality. It's about sharing the stage. If you're an influencer, if you do what you and I do, you might be the face or the person out there, but it's about sharing the stage with other people. And it's about, using language like we versus I. And that to me is the building blocks of the us versus them philosophy. It's also this idea of collaboration and the idea that you understand the other person and you're doing things that are jointly valuable. And it's not, I'm going to close a sale and they're going to say no. It's what's in the best interest of both of our selves. And part of empathy is not selling something you wouldn't buy yourself. That's like a hallmark of being empathetic, not trying to hawk or sell ideas that you don't believe in. Or for influencers, not selling a product that they would never buy to their audience.
Right.
I mean, it's very simple, but you get stuck a lot. We'll advertise things sometimes because they have a big budget, but we're like, we don't really believe in it. So we try really hard not to do that. Or we created, in my company, when Vine was really popular, we created a product that would allow you to search Vines. It was like a search engine for Vines. I didn't really believe in Vine. I was like, it seems like Twitter's a different thing, and why are they creating this video platform? But I was convinced it was going to take off, and I was going to sell sponsorship to our clients for the search engine, and Twitter would buy it, and it would be worth a lot of money. But in my gut, I never really believed in it. So we poured, tens and tens of thousands of dollars against this product. And then like a week after we launched it, they shut down Vine and it went away. And I was like, I fucking knew it, man. I never believed in it, but I went forward anyways, and I got convinced to do it. But in my gut, I never really believed in it. And so that's just always a lesson to me to, never try to sell anything you wouldn't buy yourself. And then this idea of collaboration, the collaboration imperative, I call it, which is just always viewing things from both sides. And we have you know, as people, we're 99.9% the same. We have the same DNA. There's 0.1% that separates us. But we tend to think we're all so different, and we all want different things, and we have different beliefs, which is true to a certain extent. We're not all the same.
Right.
But we're all basically the same. We all have the same human needs. And I think taking that into account when you're in your personal life or in your business life, I think is really important. And knowing that, you know, if I was on their side of the table, what would interest me about this idea or this pitch or this influencer or this program or this channel, and trying to look at it that way, not just from your point of view.
Right. I thought what was really interesting about that section and thinking about it for influencers was you talk about being able to put yourself in the other person's shoes. And I think that like when an influencer is at the beginning of their journey and they're starting to grow their following, their connection with their audience is so close, right? Because they're going through the same shit, right? Whether it's being a new mom or moving to New York and getting, you know, starting your career or whatever it is, right? Like they have that connection. And then they get successful and their lives start to very much be very different than their audience. And they lose that connection with the audience.
They start buying Lambos.
They start buying Lambos. They, you know, they're living in full townhouses in Brooklyn, and
they got commission paintings.
They've got you know fake Michelangelos on their wall.
Right.
And I think then like they're, you know, I think that they lose that connection, and then but they keep talking about their life. And I think they're not realizing it's so different, you know. And you start to look at them and be like, "This is ridiculous. This is the 15th vacation you've been on,
right?
You know." Right. And you're like, "Oh my gosh, I feel so worn out. I'm like, I need a break,
right?"
Right.
And why do you keep going to Dubai? You know?
Right. Like, how do you keep that? Like, how do you? And I think that's a bigger question, right? Like, almost every musician loses it. Right? Like you understand youth culture and you have a connection with that, and then you get successful and you're just not as interesting.
That's
right?
so true. I know your audience probably doesn't love Billy Joel, you know.
I bet everyone loves Billy Joel.
Okay, everyone loves Billy Joel. But Billy Joel has had writer's block for 20 years.
Yeah.
Like he has not written a new song in 20 years for exactly the reason that you're saying. When he was like a struggling piano man playing in bars, crafting music about his life and struggle, the words just flowed from him.
Yeah.
Then he was loaded and successful.
Taking helicopters to his shows.
Yeah, like having a house in the Hamptons and playing at Madison Square Garden all the time. He can't write songs. Like he literally cannot write a song anymore. Like he's done right. And he talks a lot about it. He's just got no material.
Yeah.
I think like that happens to influencers. It happens to artists. It happens to I'm sure like Stephen King, it's probably a little hard for him to come up with like crazy.
They got the partner writers.
They got the partner writers, but they put the Stephen King name on it. You know, I think that happens with success because you've made it to the top of the mountain, so the struggle is gone. You know, you have different struggles. Right. Like money doesn't solve all your problems, but
it solves a lot of them.
It solves a good amount of them, but you don't have the rawness and the hunger anymore. Yeah. You know.
What do you in your agency? I knew this creative director once that used to say, "There's an America out there, and we don't live in it."
That's a great line.
And it always stuck with me, and it was like, you're crafting advertisements for people that are 99.9% like you, but in a lot of ways very, very different than you. And this is not. We don't live in America. Yeah. As far as I see it, New York.
New York, no.
How do you check yourselves, and how do you work to understand communities that you don't live in, that you didn't grow up in, that you're not passionate about?
Yeah, I mean, we do. We have a pretty deep strategy department, and they do a lot of on-the-road research. You know, they'll go to whatever the product is, whatever the demographic is. They'll go and do insights and do research, and then a lot of times we'll test the work against that audience and get their reaction, because we might have a good creative idea, but we're not buying that deodorant. Doesn't speak to us, you know. Right. I would never buy those shoes. They don't speak to me. Right. But they speak to the audience. So our job as you know, creative stewards of the brand is to talk to the audience, get that information and these insights, and then reflect that in the work, and then see if it works or not before we put it out there.
I think for influencers, I mean, that's just such a nice archetype. Like, their audience is right there, right? They already have a connection with them. I think it's about making the effort to continue to understand them and continue to listen to them, and try and stay connected to their life, even when yours changes a lot. You know, even when you're no longer struggling, and the things you're worried about are very different than the things your audience are worried about. You can't, you know, if you grew your following talking about budget-friendly clothes, and now you're trying to talk about,
or how,
you know,
how to travel on $200.
Yeah, now you're talking about like, you know, is NetJets better than JetSmarter? Like, there's going to be a disconnect there.
But I think that's why a lot of what you talk about is understanding your beliefs, and those shouldn't change. You know, money aside, the belief in how you see the world shouldn't really change based on material success.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Your viewpoint should stay.
So if you have those viewpoints early on, you should make sure those are memorized, put to paper, you know what they are, and you keep bringing those up no matter what. And the material thing aside, you know, if you're about family, you can still be about family without, but being a little bit better off. Or, you know, if you're about helping other people, you can help people even more when you're, you know, financially well off. So you got to have those core beliefs, which leads me to the last principle. Good segue.
Transitioning.
That was a good segue, which was this idea of soulful. And so soulful to me, layered on top of persuasion, because a lot of we talked about is character building and how to sell. And I think adding a bit of soulfulness helps you become an inspiration, so that if you are successful, you still have, I mean, you don't do it in order to be successful, but if you are still grounded in a purpose. And so I think it's important early on for influencers, marketers, whatever your job might be, that you're grounded by doing something and giving back to the world to leave it a little bit better than you found it. And so the only skill I have is, I guess, writing a book and advertising. Like, those are the two things I know, and a little bit of bass playing, like we talked about. But I think what we started was a group that is there's 90 companies. It's a nonprofit, and we get an agency production company. You guys should actually be in it.
Yeah.
It's called the Creative Alliance, and a media platform, and they will do campaigns to get civic engagement, fight hate and discrimination, gender equality. So we have these sort of belief systems, and there's 90 companies, and companies will do like a campaign every other year, and they'll do a pro bono. There'll be some money to cover production costs and things like that, but we do that, and we created that to use our advertising powers for good, which makes people feel good about themselves, and it's a cause they believe in. But that's an example how an ad guy can do that. Yeah. And it doesn't matter how successful we are, we still are inspiring people by doing this thing that we believe in. There's a guy in the book that I talk about who's a hairdresser. His name's Josh Combs. He's a little bit of an influencer now, but he started as a hairdresser, as a barber, and he's like, that's all my life is. Like, I can cut hair, but like, that's what I'm here to do. And he started taking, on the streets of London, he would take his bag and cut the hair of homeless people on his lunch break. And then he'd go back to his barbershop. And over time, he started doing it more and more and built up a following. And now he travels the world and speaks about it, gets paid to speak, makes much better living than he did as a barber. And he's going around the world making homeless people feel more human, talking to them and cleaning them up and documenting their story. And if a hairdresser can come up with a way to do good, anyone can come up with a way to do good. But I think no matter how successful he is, he'll always be an inspiration, and he'll always sort of have that career path. So I don't know, I love that. That
and I think that, like, for influencers, you know, I feel like philanthropy is almost like not a tax, but if you get a certain amount of wealth, you kind of have to do it, right? It's like, this world is giving you so much.
Right.
And and a lot of it's probably luck, and it's certainly a lot of it's on the back of other people and on the environment and the infrastructures you live in. And there's this kind of like, you have to give. And I think for influencers, if you have a platform of 500,000 people, you're in the like 1% of having an audience.
Right.
That you have to give some of that back. You have to turn your platform over to talk about things that you care about.
It's kind of your duty.
It's your duty.
I think so too. I was at the Pencils of Promise last night.
Yeah.
You heard of that organization?
Yeah.
And that was littered with influencers.
Yeah.
I mean, there was influencers all over the place. And the way that they would do it is there'd be like a silent auction, and they would people would bid to like be on their show, or good photojournalists would take your picture and you could bid on that. So there's ways to do it where you can take your skill, find an organization you believe in, and donate your time or energy to, Gary Vee was there, and he was donating a social media strategy session. So there's a way to give back without you don't have to create a whole thing, but you can find an organization and give your time and energy and promote it that way. People can bid on it. So there's always a way to do something good, but it's good for your soul. It inspires your audience, and it keeps you grounded no matter how successful you are.
So run through them again, the 4 principles.
We got original.
Original.
Be yourself. Everyone else is taken. Generosity. Give yourself away without expecting anything in return. Empathetic is really understanding your audience and knowing that we're all, very similar. And then soulful is this idea of taking your skill and creating a purpose around your skill to be an inspiration to others. And those are the basic 4 principles.
And how do you, I think just
in the book, there's 11 habits that are much more detailed behind that.
Yeah, and so obviously, definitely get the book, Amazon, everywhere. Well, that's where you get books now, I'm sure, is Amazon. So
Barnes & Noble.
Amazon.
Kindle. Do people use the Kindle?
I read it on a Kindle.
Oh, okay. Oh, there you go.
How do you put this stuff into how do you personally, right? Like you said, generosity was something you maybe kind of had to build a system for.
Yeah.
How do you put this stuff into practice? Is it something every day that you're really mindful of and saying hey, these are things that I'm thinking about?
Yeah.
Is it the habits that are under those things?
It's a habit. There's there's 11 habits in here, and each one has sort of a way to learn it. And I talk a lot about the persuasive power of storytelling, and there's a way to learn how to tell a good story that I write about in the book that are, can be personal. This is just one example. It can be personal stories. It can be stories of your favorite book or your favorite movie. It's understanding why that is, what's the takeaway from that story. It's memorizing sort of the first and last line of the story. It's making sure the story has an arc to it. So there's a way to do that you practice and you learn, and then, hey, before you know it, you know how to tell a good story. You don't have to practice it every day.
Yeah.
But I'll have half a dozen stories memorized that I'll call upon often based on different situations, and you kind of write those down and you bank them. It's not that you have to do all these every day to practice, but there's each one has a way to do it, to check it off. Like the never let relationships drop to zero, I have a way that I do it every Monday. These are the 5 people I'm going to reach out to. The next Monday, these are the 5 people, and I keep a list. So there's a system to it,
Fantastic.
Cool.
Well, look, I think a lot of things that influencers, I never know what camera am I looking at, a lot of things that influencers can learn from this. I think influencers need to get more serious about the fact that they're marketers and advertisers in general and understand this space. And I think this is a really good place to start. Thank you so much for
thanks for having me. It was really fun.
Perfect.